There are three main ways that we can draw walls inside of Revit, and they can each be found underneath the Architecture tab and by selecting on Wall. The three ways are wall architectural, wall structural, and wall by phase. Each one has certain properties about them. Let's start with the most common wall type, which is a wall architectural. Select on wall architectural. I don't exactly care what the settings for your wall are, as long as height is the option. Click once, and then click somewhere down here and click again. Then hit escape a couple of times on the keyboard to finish drawing in your wall. Here at level 1-architectural, we can now see this architectural style wall. If we go to the properties and scroll down, we'll see that the discipline associated with this plan view is called architectural. And this is a fairly standard discipline if we're just drawing in floor plans. But inside of structural plans, we don't necessarily want to see our architectural walls. Architectural walls are walls that don't actually support anything up above, typically. If you want to draw in walls that may be supporting weight up above, usually you should use structural walls for that purpose. That means that if we go to our level 1 structural plan, notice that we can no longer see that wall that we just drew in. The reason is that it's an architectural wall. It's not a load-bearing wall. It's not foundations. Those non-load-bearing walls would not show up on a structural plan. If we wanted to see a wall in a structural plan, we would need to do a structural wall. So underneath the Architecture tab, we can select on Wall again, and this time pick Wall Structural. Make sure that instead of depth being selected, that height has been selected. It may give you a warning message, and that's okay. Just click the little X in the upper right-hand corner with height selected. Somewhere over here, click once, come straight down and click again, and then hit the escape key a couple of times on the keyboard to get out of the command. Now we can see that we have a wall inside of our structural view. Now it's important to realize that even though this wall is set to be structural, we can still see that inside of our architectural view because we still want to see our structural walls inside of our architectural model. So if we go to our level 1 architectural, just by double clicking on architectural, we can then see both the structural wall and the architectural wall that we drew earlier. So that's the main difference between the architectural and the structural walls. Architectural walls are the kinds of walls you might have on your typical floor plan view. Structural walls are typically used with your structural plans. Now the third kind of wall that we can do, we can find that if we come up here to wall, is a wall by phase. Now wall by phases are special and you won't use them very often. But if we go to a 3D view, we can see how they work. Come up here to the little house icon, which is default 3D view. And here we can see that I've drawn in what's called a mass object. If we spin it around, and we can do that by just selecting on the object and then clicking on a corner of the view cube, it'll zoom us in and we can see that we have an angle on this face, and then we have nice flat faces here on each side of the cube. So if we go up to the Architecture tab on the ribbon, select on Wall, and now pick Wall by Face, we can now draw in a wall that's associated with the face of the mass object. What this means is that over on the right-hand side, make sure that Pick Faces has been selected, then highlight over this face. Now, if you select right here in the middle, you won't be able to pick on it very easily. So I recommend coming over to the edge, and when you see the face of the cube that's sort of at an angle is highlighted, click. And you'll notice how we now have a wall that's right along the face of that mass object. If we did that along the other side as well, such as this side, click, we'll have another wall on that side, and it's on the face of this mass object. If we select on the front of the view cube, this will spin our model around, and we can see now that instead of the wall being straight up and down like the other walls have been, this wall is coming at an angle. One of the few ways that you can actually draw an angular wall inside of Revit is to draw a mass object, then come up to the Architecture tab, go to Wall, and then use a wall by face and apply the wall directly to the face of that object. So there are three different kinds of walls that you can do inside of Revit. One is a wall architectural, and that wall architectural will display in all views except for structural views. You can do a wall structural. That kind of wall will display in every view, including structural views. And then you can do a wall by face to do very custom kinds of walls, walls that need to have an odd angle or an odd shape associated with them. Revit allows us to draw a variety of wall shapes in a plan view. Let's start by going to the Architecture tab and selecting on the picture of the wall. Over on the right-hand side of the Draw panel, we can see all those different shapes that we can draw. Let's start by selecting on Line. Then make sure that a check mark is in the box called Chain. By having a check mark in that box, it means that we can draw one wall immediately after another wall. So if we click one spot, move over, click another spot, because chain is check marked, we can see that it's going to try to draw another wall in with our next click. So I'll click down and then click over, draw in 3 walls. Then to get out of the command, I'll hit the escape key a couple of times on the keyboard. If I wanted to draw one wall, then draw one wall, and draw one wall, instead of having one wall immediately after another wall, we could do that too just by clearing out the checkbox next to chain. Let's try to do that by selecting on the picture of the wall, once again using the Line tool, clicking once, then clicking again. If chain is not checkmarked, that means after your first click, then you'll notice that for your next click, it does not automatically carry over that wall to your next spot. In fact, if I would click once, come across, notice how it continues to stop drawing the wall until my next click. Click, then click again. And that's the difference between having chain checkmarked and not having chain checkmarked. One wall immediately after another versus individual walls. Now, if we want to draw a wall that's of a certain length, we can do that. Click once, and then start to move your cursor in the direction that you want to draw your wall in. If you want a 40-foot long wall, as soon as you see this temporary dimension show up, just type in 40 foot. Then hit enter on the keyboard, and now you'll have a wall which is 40 feet long. The next thing that I like to do is try a rectangular shape for a wall. So let's select on Rectangle, click once, come over, click again. We can do that same thing except with polygons. One is an inscribed polygon and the other is a circumscribed polygon. One's on the inside of the circle and the other's on the outside of a circle. I'm going to choose inscribed polygon, but the exact same picks and clicks work for the circumscribed polygon. Click once, come out, and in my case, I'm seeing 4 different sides. You may be seeing 6 or 8, depending on how many sides are shown here underneath sides on the options bar. I'll change mine to 6, and now we can see that it has 6 sides. I change it to 8, it now has 8 sides. We'll go ahead and draw this with 8 sides, and I'll just click to place my 8 sides of walls in. There's the option to draw in a circle. Select on circle. I'll click once, draw in that circular shape. If after the fact I wanted to adjust the overall size of this, I could. After my clicking to draw the circle, I could just select where it has that dimension and type in another dimension, such as 15 feet, and then click out here. You now have a 15-foot circle. Even after getting out of the command, hitting the escape key on your keyboard twice, you can come up here and select on one of your circles, type in a new dimension. In this case, I'm typing in 12 feet. The circle has now changed its overall dimension. Some other things that you can do is, once again, Architecture tab, select on the picture of the wall. There's a start-end radius arc, which allows you to pick one spot, pick another, and then specify the radius. You can do a center-end arc, which allows you to pick the center of that radius, pick the first spot of your arc, and then the second spot of an arc. There's what's called tangent end arc. We can see here in the little preview image, you basically pick one spot, pick the next spot, and it'll make an arc between those 2 spots that you've clicked. So for this example, if we pick on the tangent end arc, I'll click on the endpoint of one of my lines, pick the intersection of 2 of my walls over here in order to create an arc between them. There's also an option called a fillet arc. I can come to radius and specify the radius I'd like between 2 different walls. If I have a 5-foot radius, and I just typed in 5 foot, I could click one wall and another wall, and it'll automatically create a radiused wall right between those 2 different walls. There's another option that allows you to pick line work, just called pick lines. If you select pick lines and then pick a straight line, then it'll draw a wall right along that straight line that you selected on. And then the final option is called Pick Faces, which allows you to select on the face of an object, like a mass object or some sort of created Revit family. Pick the face of that object, and then the wall will draw itself right along the face of that wall. So you have different shapes that you can draw just by using the tools over here in your Draw palette. The options bar allows us to adjust properties associated with a wall as we're drawing the wall in. We can find the options bar if we activate the wall command. Go up to architecture and select on the picture of the wall. The options bar has turned green, it was gray, and now has a series of options associated with our wall. The first option over on the far left-hand side is called height. Now it may be called depth depending on the last wall that you drew. Depth means that the wall would go down, and an example of that would be a foundation wall. Height means that the wall is drawn straight up. As far as how deep or how high the wall goes, that can be set with the two options over to the right of depth and height. Currently, my wall is set to be an unconnected height. And unconnected means that we can specify to the right-hand side exactly how high that wall needs to be. For instance, if we set an unconnected height for 5 feet for the wall, that means that that wall, when we draw it in, will be exactly 5 feet high. In fact, let's go ahead and draw a wall in. Click once, go to the side, click again, and now this wall that we just drew is a 5-foot tall wall. Next, go to where it has unconnected, and now let's draw in a wall that goes from level 1 to level 2. The first reason is under properties, I can see that the base constraint is level 1. The second reason is because in the project browser, I can see that I'm drawing this wall on the level 1 floor plan. So it'll be drawing the bottom of the wall on level 1. I'll also be drawing the top up to level 2, which means that if I click once, click again like that, the bottom of the wall is at level 1 and the top of that wall is at level 2. We can view that if we go to one of our elevation views. Now I'll just hit the escape key twice on the keyboard to get out of the command. Then under the project browser, scroll down, find your elevations, building elevation, and double click on south for the south elevation. When you do that, you'll then see the two walls that you drew in. The wall here in the middle, this is my little 5-foot tall wall. In fact, we can see that if we select on the edge of the wall and look under properties, it has an unconnected height of 5 foot. But now that I've selected on it, if I want to adjust the height of the wall, I can do that now. If I click underneath properties where it has 5 feet and type in 15 feet, I can either click on apply or just move my cursor out here into the drawing area, and then we can see that the wall's overall height will now jump up to that 15-foot mark. The other wall that we drew in is going from level 1 up to level 2. Now, because it knows that the bottom of the wall needs to be at level 1, and it knows that the top of the wall needs to be at level 2, it means that if any of these levels should adjust, then the overall height of that wall will adjust as well. Right now, we have level 2 at 10 foot. Well, if you zoom in to where you have your level head by just spinning the wheel of the mouse, you can then click and then select on the number. In this case, I'll tell level 2 to go up to 20 feet. And if I click outside of here, the top of the wall is now up to that 20-foot mark because it'll always follow around whatever elevation that level 2 is on. We still have our other wall at 15 foot, and now we have a 20-foot wall right beside it. And those were all settings that were controlled originally when we were drawing walls on the options bar. If we go back to plan view now by just scrolling up in the project browser, and then double clicking on level 1 architectural. Let's go up to architecture. Once again, use the wall command. And we can see a little bit further over that we have something called the location line. The location line allows us to specify where it is if we're drawing a wall. Up until now, we've always drawn right along the center of the wall, which is the wall center line. But we can specify where in the wall that we want to draw. Do we want to draw it along the outside face of the wall or the inside face of the wall? Do we even want to draw this wall along the structural members of the wall? If we choose Finish Face Exterior, it means that we'll draw on the outside edge of the wall. If we click once and start to draw in a direction, and I'll zoom in just by spinning the wheel of my mouse so we can see this a little bit better, we can see that the blue dashed line is where I'm drawing from point to point, but we're on the outside edge of the wall as opposed to the center of the wall. If I click again, I'll put that in place. And now that wall was drawn right around the outside edge as opposed to right down the center because of the location line. Chain allows us to draw one wall immediately after another. If we put a check mark after that and draw our walls, we can draw one wall after another. If there's no check mark in there and we start to draw our walls, it'll space them out. So it's draw one wall and draw another wall. There's also an offset value in our options. Offset means it will be offset a certain distance from wherever it is that we're drawing. If we wanted to draw our walls maybe 2 foot off of this wall, we could do that. For the offset value, set it to be 2 feet. Now I'll pick one end of the wall, pick another end of the wall, and now we can see that this wall has been offset 2 foot from the other wall. We also have an option called radius, and this radius will take effect as we're drawing our walls in, particularly if we have chain check marked. So let's select on chain, pick a radius of 5 foot, and what this means is if we click once, click again, then draw another wall, we now have a radius between those two walls that we just drew. And I'll hit escape once on the keyboard to get out of the drawing. So our options bar gives us a wide variety of options related to our walls. That includes the height at which our walls will be drawn at, the location of which we're drawing our walls, whether or not the walls should be drawn immediately after each other, if there needs to be an offset set for the walls, and if there's a radius that will allow us to automatically draw in a radius between each wall that we're drawing. Your Revit projects will usually have multiple wall types inside of them. A wall type is a construction method for how that wall should be constructed with certain materials. If we go into the Architecture tab and select on the picture of the wall, then under Properties, we have what's called the Type Selector list. You may recognize the similar name, the Type Selector list and Wall Types. It's because we can now, on the Type Selector list, select the type of wall that we want to draw. If we click there on the Type Selector list where we had a picture of the wall, we'll see that we have a variety of different walls that we can choose from. And each one of these is a different type of wall with a different type of construction. If you select on this little bar that goes down the side of the Type Selector list, you can then hold your mouse button down and scroll down in order to see your stacked walls, your curtain walls, interior, generic, exterior walls, a variety of different wall types. To see the properties of some of these walls, let's first go all the way to the top of the list and then select on the exterior brick and CMU on metal stud wall. Now this just happens to be the most complex wall type that's available inside of Revit. Now you can actually create even more complex walls than that. This just happens to be the most complex wall that comes standard with your Revit. If we go to Edit Type, then select on Edit next to Structure, we can then see all the layers of materials as well as the thicknesses of those layers of materials that make up this type of a wall. In this case, we have some concrete masonry units, we have an area for an airspace, plywood, gypsum wallboard, and they're all layers of material inside of this wall. If we want to see a preview of that wall, we can do that too. I'm just going to click on this top bar up here just to move it over on my screen, and then select on the Preview button. And this will give us a preview of what this wall will look like inside of a plane view with all of its different layers of materials. To see it at a section view, we can come straight down where it has Floor Plan and Modify Type, and then click on Section. And now we can see the way that this wall would look in a section view, including having a top cap on it, as well as some extra architectural features associated with it, which is called Sweeps and Reveals. For right now, though, we'll just leave it at that and then click on OK. And OK one more time. The next thing I'd like to do is go underneath Properties on the Type Selector list again and pick a much less complex wall, such as this foundation 12-inch concrete. Now, a foundation 12-inch concrete wall is 12 inches thick, but it only has one layer of material. And we can see that if we click on Edit Type, they come up here to Edit next to Structure. And now we can see that we have a structural layer of concrete cast in place, which is 1 foot in thickness. So your different wall types can have different layers of materials associated with them, and each layer of material will have their own, as well as actual material settings associated with them. Now, if we click on OK to that and OK one more time, we'll get out of that dialog box. And then finally, I want to point out that underneath Properties in the Type Selector list, we have our generic walls. Now, the reason why we have generic walls is a generic wall is a very good wall to use when you don't know what kind of wall should go there yet. Maybe you haven't determined what the material finish on the outside of the wall should be, or you haven't determined what the construction methods are for that type of wall, but you know basically how thick that wall should be. In those instances, you can choose a generic wall which is fairly close to the thickness that you'd like to use, and then draw that instead of being specific with the exact kinds of walls and materials that you need to create. Finally, if you want to draw one wall type versus another wall type, all you need to do is select one of the wall types you want to draw off your type selector list, and then click and click again to draw in that wall type on your screen. If you change your wall type to a different wall type on the type selector list, click again, and you'll draw in that type of wall. And finally, if later on you want to switch out one of your walls with a wall of a different type, you can do that too. Select on one of the walls that you've drawn, go into Properties, go to your type selector list, and then pick a different type of wall off the type selector list. When you do, your wall will automatically update in your Revit model. All your schedules associated with it will update, as well as your sections and elevation views. The different types of walls indicate the different kinds of construction that are available to you. Then your type selector list allows you to pick which type of wall that you want to place, as well as if you want to change the properties of that wall from one type of wall to another type of wall.